Hey folks, MasterCoX here. Now first of all, there are some spoilers here from the recent arc in the Dragon Ball Super manga, so if you're not reading it and you wish to wait for the animated version to come out, do be aware of that before starting this video. But then again, things can easily change and adapt come the televised edition, but we shall see in due course, when Toei gets its act together. In any case, we would like to discuss what went down last week in the latest chapter of the manga, as it not only goes into the second act of the overall story in our opinion, but it really brought home to us some of our thoughts and theories about what we could expect when it comes to its inevitable conclusion. By the way, do check out our podcast channel Up on the Lookout for some of our more detailed and in-depth discussions about this and many other topics about Dragon Ball. Thank you. Okay, so, the Granola the Survivor arc. To Haverock and I, this story may be the most personal and reflective arcs since the Raditz saga. Honestly, yes, I know that to some of you, this may be the worst thing since Goku chucked a Senzu bean at Cell, that we're seeing less punchy. But when you really sit down and think about it, while the characters in the show are now literally ungodly powerful, the whole thing seems to revolve around something a little more close to home this time out. Something that is far more relatable in a property which has recently been known for getting sort of out of touch of reality with its audience. That being character relations and interactions. I know, right? Even fights like this that we see in the first arc of the saga, the dialogue and situations are more personal and serving a little more purpose than, of course, the usual punchy punch stuff. There is motivation behind this, as well as some mild cases of tragedy and empathy on the part of Granola, despite him rubbing me up the wrong way for a long time. It's all okay now. We don't need a reason in Dragon Ball to have some good old punchy punches, but it's nice to have something a little bit more introspective right now when it comes to the people behind the punchy punch. And sure, the whole personal part is kinda overshadowed by something of a fact which on the surface sounds quite absurd and ridiculous, and a bit fanficky, I will admit, that we now have two characters who have now proclaimed in text themselves to be the strongest in the universe. But this is something that has been an issue in Dragon Ball, not super specific, for a while now. I mean, if you really want to dig deep, every single story, not just Dragon Ball's, has a point where there is a character who is the strongest there is in that particular story world. It's just now that feat has been boiled down to the notion that you can get it via Dragon Balls. But to those feeling that this new set of Dragon Balls are overpowered and should be destroyed, I think that will happen. We get the feeling that Monaito will die by the end of the story, thusly bringing an end to this most dangerous set of wish-granting orbs there is outside of the Super Dragon Balls, despite Torombo not having freaking huge fists like Porunga over here. So this whole thing will be wrapped up before it can be used by anybody else. We also feel that as of chapter 78, all of the cards have been revealed to us in regards to what we can expect in the story. There's really not much left to reveal to us in terms of the setup for the final encounter. The only two remaining mysteries you could say that are left within the story, that could spell some intrigue for us going forward, will be exactly how Bardock managed to defeat Gas, despite the Saiyan being weaker than the Heater we found out in chapter 78, and what were the added conditions of Elec's wish? Because, if you think about it and you go back to that story, we never find out about what condition Elec accepted on Torombo when he bestowed the same power on Gas that Granola had. Did he have the same thing that his lifespan was reduced, or was it something even more drastic? But despite these two bits of info being missing at this time, we can slowly start to look at the story as a whole, start to dissect it, talk about the themes we were trying to pinpoint back in the earlier stages of the story, and see whether they landed as intended, or whether they failed to stick the landing and sort of diluted the impact that Toyotaro and Toriyama were going for when they came up with the original narrative. When you step back and look at the whole package, the Granola the Survivor arc actually resembles the Dragon Ball Super Broly movie. No, it's not straight up copying it, it's just sort of familiar, but only in much more detail, since we get to spend much more time with the titular character than we could ever do with Broly in 2 hours. Basically, you have Granola, Oatmeal, the Heaters, and Monaito that are the real figureheads within this narrative. And I bet you're thinking that, well, why haven't we included the Saiyans in that roster? They should be at the top of the list since Dragon Ball's all about Goku and Vegeta these days, right? Well, that's down to the fact that, in our minds, that's not the case. They don't really figure all that much in this story. In reality, Goku and Vegeta are only the supporting acts. They have been roped into this by the Heaters, yes, and they were used for a couple of saps, but they're not the main players. And yes, granted, Vegeta does get development here, but he's not the main focus. Granola is. We also do need to mention Beerus and Whis were here as support, but even much more so than Goku and Vegeta, due to the cat's importance for Vegeta's arc in this tale. It would be catastrophic if we didn't. Of course, if you really wish to split hairs, which is difficult if you're a monkey because, you know, really strong hair, you can add Bardock and Muesli to the mix. But those two actual characters have a part to play in where the characters are today, although they mainly operate in a flashback setting. And then there's Frieza, as the unseen evil, though he doesn't serve as a fully fledged character, but rather as a story tool, a plot device. A lot of the heavy hitters in this tale are here because of the actions of Frieza in some shape or form. Whether we will actually see the Tyrant is a whole other matter. A part of us is actually thinking that we're not going to see him at all, or he's just going to turn up right at the end of the story and effectively go, "Oh, hello there, what did I miss?" It's a sort of subversion play like he did in the Moro Saga where he just noped out of that one as far as he could. But here's an interesting factoid for you. The whole gang here seems to have either some sort of relationship with one another, or they are serving as parallels to other characters who existed 40 years ago, when all of this began. This is something you don't often see in Dragon Ball. The idea that the people in the story are connected in a meaningful way, much more so than usual. There's some degree of history between them. The closest you can get to this is the Android Saga, the remains of the Red Ribbon Army coming after Goku after what he'd done to their organization all those years ago. This to me makes the whole affair quite interesting to see how all that emotional baggage and time together will come into play later on when there's punchy stuff involved. There's a lot more emotion and understanding going behind this. A lot of these parties may not like each other, but they've got time on their side, which is rare to see in this show. As for Granola, he is the center of all of this, the one that ties them all together. He has been forced to work for Elec, sort of traded by Monaito in exchange for his life, not knowing that he was actually the one responsible for the death of his mother, and not Bardock or any of the Saiyans that he oh so vilified for all of his life and drove us mad for months. I'm so glad that he was wrong. He was also raised by Monaito and saved by Bardock. Granola hates the Saiyans, while ironically having a lot in common with both Goku and Vegeta, with his story being a mixture of the two. He has the caring grandfather figure like Goku did, and then he was forced into a life of servitude by an overseeing power like Vegeta. Granola has more in common personality-wise with Vegeta. If you really want to boil him down, the Cerulean is Vegeta from when he was a young and angry soul. Despite the two characters' numerical ages being almost identical. Just work with us here. The Prince, though, has a somewhat interesting arc in this one. He has finally found a way to get something equally impressive to Ultra Instinct, but in order to do so and use that power, he needs to go into sort of full acceptance mode. Not freaky face mode, there is a difference. He needs to let go of his guilt, but his meeting with Granola put the brakes on that idea. It instead opened up old wounds. Had Vegeta not experienced that, Ultra Ego would have completely trounced Granola, since it basically has no limits. We get the suspicion that if Vegeta were to use his power against anyone else, that he had no remorse or guilt toward them, he could mop the floor with anybody. Like Gas. And once again, he sees Granola as a vision of himself from many years before, which resonates with him enough to try and help him in the only way he knows, by fighting them, and showing his opponent how destructive this power can be. That he could easily become obsessed with it, and ultimately destroying his very essence and himself. We saw that about to happen in Chapter 76. Granola was willing to let his anger get the better of him and destroy the planet and everyone on it. What do you think Vegeta did when he was facing Goku for the first time, remember? Scorch the world with a Gallic gun? We also feel that the last chapter has, without a doubt, shown that Vegeta only surrendered the fight in Chapter 76 because he wanted to help the Cerulean, and he was more than capable of ending that fight if he wanted to. That wasn't him being weak or feeble like some people on the internet were shocked to believe. There was a plan here, because if he just chose to fight Granola to the end, just using Ultra Ego to the fullest, that would have not led to any progress, despite the visuals looking impressive, but yeah, to some, that's probably all that they would want, so What really impresses me most about this story, something of a rarity in Super actually, is that Goku himself is playing the second fiddle here, not the Prince. Goku is also acting rather smartly here, with some sense of strategy and tact, which had previously deserted him throughout most of Super, him acting like an imbecile. He's acting more instead like he does in the Buu saga, knowing when to step in and when not to. Cool. He's then given some interesting information about his father, which is pretty nice to have, but it doesn't become the main focus of the story. Goku receives it, accepts it, but the story then doesn't become all about him, which is very reassuring. And ever since Vegeta asked him to not get in the way, Goku hasn't. He's only holding in gas in order to give Vegeta time to get the Senzu Bean, not knowing that the prince has a different and more noble idea going. Goku is being a team player. And then there's Gas, the heater that we were predicting to become the main physical threat of the arc, and he has sure enough fulfilled his destiny. He's a very serious person and to the point in his words. But the interesting thing about him is that he does have a sympathetic edge to himself, as he is incredibly loyal to his siblings and wants to protect them at all costs. Even if he has a rather cool way of expressing it. The costs in this example are Elec wish, which we know nothing about for now, other than it gave the Heater Boy a pretty considerable boost in power and height. But another interesting point to take into account here is that Gas has harbored a certain disdain toward Granola, feeling that he is unfit to work for his family. This tells us a little bit about the Heater actually, as he seems to be rather unwilling to rely on others, outside influences. He kind of feels that this prodigious bounty hunter here had been stepping on his turf for a very long time. He doesn't want the Cerulean to steal his thunder. We know that Gas is a prideful individual as well, as his mysterious loss toward Bardock seems to really weigh heavily on him, and has done for a long time. It's almost like what happened that day is something that he isn't proud of, and he has dwelled on for decades. We don't actually know if he got to his power by training or if he's naturally gifted, but we can certainly bet that if Gas is a hard worker, that his hatred of Granola may come from the fact that the Cerulean was also naturally talented, and had recently cheated his way to a massive power and bounty working for Elec. Something of which Gas cannot ignore, and has to act now. Ooh, you used Torombo to get power, ooh, now you're cooking with Gas. Which again kind of resembles the initial class obsession of Vegeta, giving us another mirror, another parallel. In a way, the Granola the Survivor arc is like a murder mystery, as we slowly learn the entire story and background. The characters are carefully used, and each of them serves a purpose. There is very little fluff. There are no random appearances that go nowhere, yet at least. Every element serves to uncover the bigger picture, the whole story, and if you think about it further, this feels like a really unusual amount of pre-planning for Dragon Ball. And sure, like we said before, there are some wonky elements that are connected with the very nature of Super, but as a solo outing, if you just took the Granola the Survivor arc as its own thing, it feels sort of refreshing. In previous videos, we said that this is mainly a story about forgiveness, empathy, and revenge. But in a way, it's now also about making mistakes and being able to live with said mistakes. Rebuilding your life after the fact. Vegeta's managed to do that. Can Granola follow suit? Will Oil and Maki realize that they and Gas have been played by Elec for his own personal gain? That to him, his siblings are nothing but high-rate minions, if anything? These are the stakes we care about. Something that the fact that Super is set in a time where the stakes are low, it doesn't factor into this time, for once. Is Granola actually doomed in 3 years' time? Can he find peace? Will Monaito kick the bucket and maybe save Granola for death by giving him his final ripple? We know that Goku and Vegeta are going to be okay, but damn it, it'd be a real shame if all of these new characters perished. This personal approach has worked, at least for us. We care about these newcomers. We worry if they're gonna be okay. And of course, this works only if you like them. But we feel there is stuff to like here. Even if Granola is basically Shadow the Hedgehog in this universe, but at times, he can be a pretty grounded hedgehog, so we are willing to give him a pass. So far, so good. Hopefully the arc won't make any ridiculous twists at the very end, and Goku won't steal Granola's and Vegeta's spotlight at the very end. But history has a tendency of repeating itself. Resurrection F. In our minds though, Gas should be the final boss, unless Elec has something else prepared, though this would kind of downplay him being the sort of mind type of villain. And we are not that far away from the conclusion, we think. Maybe a few more chapters? And you know, hey, maybe you could throw in a nice Frieza cameo at the end too, because it would be priceless to see his reaction. But what do you folks think? Has this saga impressed you in its more subtle approach, or would you have rather it stuck to the tried and tested method of punchy punchy? Leave a comment below and let's get this discussion going. And I will see you in the next video. Catch you later!